Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first official episode of Autopsy of a Writer. I'm your host, Brad Mitzelfelt, and today's topic is what is writing? So, to start off with, I thought we'd begin with the easiest way of defining writing, and that's by looking at the definition you get when you type writing definition in Google. Quick disclaimer, don't trust everything Google tells you is the definition. Sometimes it's best to go to like Merriam-Webster and look at what their definition is. So I'm going to more than likely give you both, and you can decide yourself the difference. So according to Google, writing has two main definitions. The first is the activity or skill of marking coherent words on paper and composing text. Okay, so that's kind of like actual, handwriting. And the second one is the activity or occupation of composing text for publication, which is primarily what we will be focusing on this channel. So let's go to Merriam-Webster, because Merriam-Webster is a well-known dictionary, and see what Merriam-Webster has to say. So Merriam-Webster says the act or process of one who writes, such as the act or art of forming visible letters or characters, or the act or practice of literary or musical composition, because writing can be, related to music. Second definition is something written, such as letters or characters, excuse me, that serve as visible signs of ideas, words, or symbols, a letter, note, or notice used to communicate or record, written composition, or inscription. The third is a style or form of composition, and the fourth is the occupation of a writer. The last one's kind of, the occupation of a writer. I don't really know why you need to put that one in your dictionary, but okay. So let's go beyond the strict definition of what writing is. And let's look, for example, at, I went to englishclub.com so that I could see what they said, and they essentially said the same thing, that writing is using symbols to communicate thoughts and ideas. Okay. Then they go on to explain in different detail that the reasons why people write, and they weren't very detailed about it, so I'm going to kind of skip the rest of that stuff from them, and I'm going to move on to the 4 types of writing, and I'll circle back to the why to write. The 4 main types of writing, which you can find listed a lot of different places on the internet, are expository, persuasive, narrative, and descriptive. There might be other ones out there that are obscure types of writing. Writing changes as time goes on. The reasons why we write change as time goes on. There's just a lot of different nuance that comes about that didn't exist in the past. And just I asked on Twitter what people thought writing was, and just to give you a little funny blurb here, Patrick Johnson said that it's math with letters, which, kind of makes sense. I mean, composition is pretty difficult, and sometimes math can be pretty difficult. And then he was responded to by someone else who said, while juggling live badgers and flaming chainsaws. So, math is with letters while juggling live badgers and flaming chainsaws. That is writing. I kind of agree with that, but I'll get to explaining why later. I just wanted to throw that out there. So back to the 4 types of writing. Expository is writing when your intent is to inform or explain a subject. So you see this a lot in like scientific magazines and things like that, where they're talking about a specific subject and trying to teach you something. You also see it a lot in like textbooks that you would read during school. Persuasive writing is writing that states the opinion of the writer and attempts to influence the reader. You'll see this a lot in like journals, and you'll see it a lot in opinion articles in newspapers and things like that, where somebody's laying out an argument and then trying to support that with context and factual information. There's descriptive writing, which is basically you're describing, it's just you're describing something in great detail, which kind of blends in with narrative writing, which is when you're telling a story, and technically all of these do. Narrative writing is primarily what we'll talk about on this channel, but you will use descriptive, persuasive, and expository writing probably during the course of writing anything. When you're writing a story, you're going to describe the location around them. You're going to persuade the reader that that location is real and things like that. You're going to explain the motivations behind a character's actions, but you're going to explain it, the differences in the way you do it. All of these things are part of narrative writing, but the difference between those types of writing and narrative writing is how. Description, is description no matter where you use it, but persuasion and exposition you primarily show through actions and thoughts of your main character in a narrative story. So back to what writing is to me, as far as related to what the guys on Twitter said. In the course of this channel, we're going to primarily talk about the narrative writing. So narrative writing is the act of telling a story. You're just doing it with words written down either on, paper or on a computer, on the internet, on, wherever. You can write on a blog, you can write on, you can write a story and put it up on Kindle. You can have physical copies printed. It doesn't really matter the medium that people read it. The fact is, if you're doing narrative writing, the goal is to tell a story and to entertain someone. That being said, you kind of got to look at your motivations for writing, and there'll be more videos about motivations for writing down the line, but primarily the goal of narrative writing is to tell a story so that someone is entertained while they read it. If you don't have the desire to do that, then you probably shouldn't write. If your goal is not to entertain people, then writing is not for you. At least narrative writing. If your goal is to tell a story, to tell somebody what something is, then expository writing is fine. Descriptive writing, persuasive writing, whatever. But this channel is not dedicated to those things. This channel is dedicated to narrative writing, fiction writing. So that brings up the next point: the difference. You'll hear a lot of people talk about fiction and nonfiction writing. Primarily descriptive, persuasive, and expository are related to nonfiction writing, meaning that it is writing about stuff that is real, stuff that actually exists. Whereas fiction writing is writing about stories, things that don't exist. So nonfiction, according to Google, is prose writing that is based on facts, real events, and real people. So you're going to get like biographies and history stories. So textbooks and things like that are nonfiction. There are things that actually happened. Whereas fiction is literature in the form of prose, especially short stories and novels that describes imaginary events and people. So you're going to be talking about, so let's take Lord of the Rings, for example. Lord of the Rings there's absolutely no part of Lord of the Rings that really ever happened. It's based primarily on Tolkien's life, but that stuff itself never actually happened. There was no Ring of Power. There were no dragons. There were no Nazgul. None of that stuff was real. Sam, Frodo, Aragorn, those are all fake characters that Tolkien made up to put in a story. So that falls under fiction. It's about imaginary events and people. If you are writing about the life and times of George Washington, that is nonfiction, as long as you're telling the truth. If you're taking him and writing some false story about him, then what you're writing is fiction. We call that historical fiction. And I will get into the different types, different genres, subgenres of fiction in another video. But today's video is primarily focused just on what writing is. And I think by now that you've probably gotten a good definition of what writing is in the form of what we're going to focus on in this channel. But just to spell it out again, we're going to focus on fiction writing, narrative writing. Those are basically two kinds of definitions of the same thing. You're writing to tell a story, you're writing to entertain people. So next time, we're going to probably talk about Star Wars as an analogy for writing. I'm sure people are going to probably have a little bit of a hissy fit over that, some of it, because, you know, Star Wars has its fan base and everybody has their own opinions and things like that. But it should be interesting. So at least you have an understanding of what writing is at this point, and then we'll look at, you know, down the line, probably after the Star Wars video, we'll talk about genres. And then probably after that, we'll talk about motivations for writing. And then we'll move along from there. So I hope to see you guys again on the next video. Right on.